We're here to celebrate, to honor everyone who contributed to this book, to remember Joe, to try out the book because it wouldn't be a Joe event unless we were thinking and discussing. And most importantly, just connecting with others in this amazing community. It has been so long to have, be in person and to be together. We'll talk more this morning about how the book moved from Joe's draft manuscript to a published volume, but we want to acknowledge three important entities in that process at the beginning of today's program. First, Meredith welcomed the Mestenhauser family. We want to thank them. It was with their blessing and encouragement that we continued working on this project. We will be forever grateful for their support and their role as champions of the volume. Anne, Tricia, and Brian, thank you. We couldn't have done it without you. We want to thank the GPS Alliance for their sponsorship of the event and for their work through the Mestenhauser Legacy Initiative, which promotes important dialogue about international education and, importantly, for programs for student leadership, development, and cross-cultural interactions. And we decided right away that all of the book proceeds will go to the Mestenhauser Legacy Initiative to support these programs. So thank you. Thank you, Meredith. And I also want to acknowledge in November 2018, the GPS Alliance helped us put together a hybrid event, people in person and on Zoom from all over the world, to figure out how are we really going to do this book? How are we going to involve people and be inclusive? And that was hosted by Gail Woodruff, who is beaming in from Wisconsin. So hi, Gail, retired director of curriculum and campus internationalization at the University of Minnesota. And also Elizabeth Schwartz, her successor, with the help of many, including Jennifer Schultz. Thank you, Jennifer, for filming us today and taking pictures and just helping us put this together. The initial step to organize the direction of the book and identifying many of the contributors couldn't have been done without the GPS Alliance. We also want to acknowledge and thank Elspeth Jones, editor of the series Internationalization of Higher Education at Rutledge, who saw the project through to publication and who planted the seed that this volume could be a way to bring Joe's work to a new generation of people in the field of international education. And she is somewhere in Tasmania, Australia, but we want to. So this is truly a global effort and a global project.
It falls to me right now to recognize our contributing authors, but first of all, I want to recognize this space. The Campus Club is truly an interdisciplinary space on campus. It's where all the disciplines in colleges come together. And from when I worked with Joe early in my career for about 10 years, and one of my jobs was organizing lunches by the seat of our pants when some visitor was coming into town from some other country. And so Joe would give me a list, or just tell me a list of invite, these are the people to invite or who would be interested, the fields that are related to this visitor. And so I would get on the phone and call them up and invite them to a Dutch street lunch at the campus club. And in this room. So Joe is with us in this room in some way. So this was a room that was available, and it seemed like we should take this room. And so we're grateful to the Campus Club, and we want to support. I just reactivated my membership to support the real meeting of the minds that happens in this space. Then there's thanking the community of Joe, which, because you're here, you're part of that. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot. But I want the contributing authors to stand or raise your hand as I call your name. The contributing authors who are here today, Dean Meredith McQuaid, thank you so much. One of the things early in the process we thought about calling this, the internet, debate, having debate in the title, and Meredith made that, really brought that into because she really engaged with Joe in some great ways, and every chapter is interesting. Hers is great to read for that reason. Dr. Kay Thomas. Yay. Joe knew Joe from high school. She lived on the street. Dr. Ava Yabova, who's with us from the Czech Republic today, and we're so happy. And it's a special because of the anniversary of the Velvet Revolution yesterday. And we're so enriched by you, Ava. Ava was the first Mestenhauser scholar on campus and was an advisee of Joe's. We'll hear from her later in the program. Dr. Deborah Pembleton. An alum of the university, she's at St. John's, and is the director of Asian Studies there. Professor Michael Goh, our own Professor Michael Goh. Thank you so much, Michael. Dr. Yulia Kartashkina. There she is. Terrific chapter on neuroscience, and that was her discussion with Joe. And doctoral student Haida Chikate. And Bob Brunix, President Bob Brunix, was interviewed for the book, so we know. We also want to acknowledge Mark Schneider, who's with us today. Mark took Joe in Prague in 1992. That is a happy picture. You know, many pictures of Joe are very serious. And that year, Mark captured a picture of Joe as we so often knew him, because he smiled big, and his joy in that picture is just a treasure. And we thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. Many who cannot be with us today: Professor Jerry Fry, who is traveling, Gail Woodruff, who's here remotely, Elizabeth Schwartz, who was mentioned, Barbara Kapler, Inga Steglitz in Deerdorf and other parts of the USA, Nico Joost in South Africa. His chapter, his friendship with Joe, I just recommend everybody read this chapter. It's just so critical. Hanneke Teekens and Hans de Wit in Europe. In Australia, Betty Lesk, who was a speaker on, she's a Mestenhauser speaker here on campus, and the first one in the series, Shantan Chang and Catherine Gomez from Australia too. And in Japan, alumna Miki Horie, who was one of Joe's advisees and has such an interesting chapter in the book. They're all interesting, but it's just hard to mention one without all of them. We love reading their chapters. It's been just a joy, and it's been a revelation to me that this was about the future as well as the past and the present. Also, we want to just mention Frank Braun, who was going to be here today, but he's an old friend of Joe's. I just have a picture of Frank. Many of you probably know Frank. He was not able to come today, but we are thinking of him, and maybe he'll see a recording at some point. And then also the late Michael Page and John Cogan, who we lost during the process of the book. And Michael, the week that we had that hybrid gathering, he was registered for it, and that wasn't there. It was really hard to lose him. He had so much knowledge about Joe. And so, yes, Frank Braun, late Michael Page, John Cogan, they were co-founders of the Comparative and International Development Education Program. They consulted with Joe from the beginning and relentlessly recruited him until he joined them there in 1991. Thank you also, Bob Brunings, for having a hand in that, and helped it become a doctoral program.
As Gayla mentioned, we have a few people who couldn't be here today, and they've asked us to read a few words. I wanted to start with a message from Gail Woodruff. I'm sorry I'm unable to be with you all this morning in person, as this is one party that I really didn't want to miss. I have such an emotional response when I think about what this morning represents, the fact that Joe's book is finally done. I am moved to tears as I consider how long Joe worked on his research and writing, and how motivated you all have been to see that his final work is now published. First and foremost, I'm deeply grateful to Ann D'Angelo, Mary Catherine O'Brien, and Gayla Marty for the tireless and selfless commitment that you have made to getting this book done. You are saints, and I know how much Joe admired and appreciated each of you, which is a little strange for me to be reading. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for making this dream come true. I'm doing this for you, Gail. I also wish to thank Eva Yanovova, another Team Joe player, for wanting to bring Joe's voice and his message to our European colleagues and ensure that Joe's legacy continues in the Czech Republic. Thank you, Eva, and thank you for being here. coming all this way to be with us. And finally, I wish to thank Elizabeth Schwartz, who I know is also unable to be with you all today. Shortly after I started the Mestenhauser Legacy Initiative, Elizabeth joined my team and was committed from day one to getting to know Joe and his needs and wishes and seeing that his legacy was fulfilled. Elizabeth worked tirelessly with me behind the scenes as we created the structure to pay homage to Joe. Elizabeth knows how important this book is and what it represents. I congratulate all of the contributors to the book on their thoughtful essays and look forward to connecting with each of you sometime in the future as we continue to think about what we have learned from Joe and how this book will move international education into the future. And I would be remiss, Gail, if we didn't give you a shout out none of us would be here if it weren't for you working side by side with Joe to really move his legacy initiative forward. I remember vividly Joe saying, well, I'm not planning on going anywhere. Why are we talking about this now? And you being the ultimate planner, you got things started years in advance, and so it was such a joy to work side by side with him. He was the first lecturer for the initiative, and then to bring Betty Lesk, and to have student award recipients, also with Haida here for the future, representing the future. So thank you, Gail. Thank you.
She writes, while I am not there in person, I can envision the energy, joy, and thoughtful reflection that you all bring to this space. I met Joe in 1989 before I understood his stature, his drive, and what he was capable of accomplishing, including bringing such a talented, creative, and persistent editorial team together to handcraft this great work into being. Barbara, I'm going to add, if you're watching this, that really it's the chapter authors as well, and so that's what we're hoping to do here today. In these wildest times in international education, how fortunate we all are for Joe and the deep connections he fostered that enabled us to bring forth our own voices today in this new collaboration and publication. Sincerely, Barbara.
So Joe died just short of his 90th birthday in 2015, and he was at that time working on a manuscript, and Mary Catherine and Anne were working with him on it, and it was far from finished when he passed away. And so that's one of the reasons it has been a long process to identify which part to build this book around, and then how to structure the book, and Elspeth played such a big role in doing that. One of the things that many contributors did was write about Joe had a very powerful personal story, and so we needed to write a short bio. How do you put Joe's life into such a not a whole chapter, but even just a little section of a chapter? Because I'd worked with Joe for so long, and especially during the time when he went back to the Czech Republic in 1991, he got a Fulbright, and then all the flurry of activity and the media that he got at that time. I was a communications person in the office, so I had a lot of stuff in my files that I could draw on, and then also his CDs. And so I'm going to read the beginning of chapter 1, which is Joe's bio and includes a few of the photos that you find that are now part of the University of Minnesota archives. When Joseph Mestenhauser entered the field of international higher education in 1951, he was a 25-year-old Cold War emigre from Prague, newly married and a graduate assistant in the University of Minnesota's recently created Foreign Student Advisor's Office. He had started over. Mestenhauser arrived like so many immigrants and refugees with global experience of a most personal kind. He was born in 1925 in the town of Wrocław, 80 miles northeast of Prague, near what is now the Polish border, a mining region where his father was an educator. Czechoslovakia, as it was then called, possessed an ancient national identity as Bohemia, but it was a young state, founded in 1918 upon independence from the Austrian Empire. But the peaceful period of his childhood was cut short. He was 13 years old when the Munich Agreement was signed, leading to the German takeover a year later. Mestenhauser's teens were spent under Nazi occupation and war. As he would describe later to his children, his parents put themselves in danger many times to, quote, help enemies of the Reich, unquote. War's end found Mestenhauser studying law at Charles University in Prague, where he became a leader in the Czech National Student Association. His name was on the ballot for the parliamentary election. That freedom was brief. The communist revolution came in the winter of 1948. As Madeleine Albright recounted in the memoir of her childhood in Prague and London, on Monday night, February 23rd, 10,000 students staged a march in support of democracy. It was the only public demonstration on behalf of liberal government in the entire crisis. Mestenhauser, age 22, was among them. The university was shut down and the elections were never held. A few months before graduation, he was arrested as an enemy of the people, jailed, and beaten. Despite a fractured hip, Mestenhauser escaped with the help of Confederates and an underground network. He crossed into Germany on March 19, 1948, St. Joseph's Day, which he would mark for the rest of his life. One of Mestenhauser's strongest memories of refugee camps was forming study circles to teach and learn. Years later, he would often repeat "each one, teach one," shaped by that experience, using a phrase born during U.S. slavery when Africans were denied education. Tried in absentia and sentenced to 25 years in prison at home, the door closed. He made his way to England and then to the United States on a scholarship to Eastern Washington College of Education, where he worked as a ski instructor. He knew no English, but soon learned the language, completing a bachelor's degree in 1950 and arriving at the University of Minnesota as a graduate student in political science. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities, so there's a break here, practitioner and scholar. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is the flagship urban campus of a comprehensive state research university located about 200 miles from the headwaters of the Mississippi River. In 1950, student attendance was about 21,000. The following year, Mestenhauser's career path was charted when he was hired as an administrative fellow by Forrest G. Moore, director of the University of Minnesota's Foreign Student Advisor's Office. Moore was a World War II U.S. Navy veteran, committed to international students arriving in the post-war period. He recognized and mentored Mestenhauser's leadership capacity and talent for the next 25 years. Mestenhauser's first publication, "How Do You Like America?" was authored with Moore in 1951. Mestenhauser possessed enormous physical and intellectual energy. He became known for attending conferences where he met with people to discuss ideas and plans until all hours of the evening, and then again at 6:30 for breakfast. When asked how he did it, he said he didn't need much sleep. He always wore a suit to work and insisted that people call him Joe. The first 2 decades of Mestenhauser's career coincided with the historic university growth and aligned with the leadership of Edmund Williamson, an innovative educational psychologist and dean of student affairs. Williamson advocated for research-based practice, and Moore, who held a PhD himself, quote, insisted on a pedagogical basis for everything, as Mestenhauser would describe it. While completing a master's in political science and starting on a doctorate, Mestenhauser advanced in the Foreign Student Advisor's Office as a student personnel worker, then acting international student advisor for a year, then assistant director in 1958, creating student programs at every step. One was a reciprocal student exchange program at the Free University of Berlin that would expand to Asia, Africa, and South America. And I will say, as an aside, that was the exchange that I went on that brought me into the field. Mestenhauser and Moore were instrumental in founding the Minnesota International Center, today Global Minnesota, and the National Association of Foreign Student Affairs, NAFSA, of which Moore served as president in 1958 and 59. They also recruited and retained a diverse and increasingly professional staff. At that time, student affairs staff members with a PhD were eligible to enter the tenure track. Upon completing his own PhD in political science in 1960 with a dissertation on post-war Indonesia, Mestenhauser became an assistant professor. While focused on international students and culture, his reading and writing drew from many disciplines, which would become his hallmark. For 3 months in the summer of 1963, he traveled to Japan, Korea, and the Philippines as a lecturer and consultant to the U.S. Education Foundation, supported by his first Fulbright Hays Award. His engagement with the Pacific region would last. After he was granted tenure in 1965, a Fulbright Hays Advanced Research Grant allowed him to spend the 1966-67 academic year in the Philippines, and by 1977 he advanced to full professor. With a growing family, he and his wife Pat purchased a cabin on a lake 40 minutes from campus where they hosted international students, faculty, and other visitors along with office staff. After water skiing and picnics, gatherings often included extended discussions based on readings and their application to campus programming and research. And I was at those picnics. I will stop there, but this is the bio that brings us to where we are and also inspires the structure of this program today, because it wouldn't be a Joe event without talking about ideas that are going to move us forward at the end. But there is more. There's more that tells about his becoming a full professor and director of the office when Forrest retired, and then moving into the College of Education and Human Development as a professor there and really devoting himself to full-time teaching, and a diplomat as the honorary consul for the Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic. And then as a professor emeritus, he did not stop. He was working and thinking and sharp to the end of his life.
So it was in that phase of his career that I met Joe, and I need to thank Gail again because I was a newly arrived graduate student, and she said, I have a project for you. I need you to go start having these breakfasts with Joe at the Egg and I so that he can work through a project with you that he wants to bring to publication. And that was the manuscript that was the past, present, and future of international education publication that GPS Alliance published in 2011. And through that relationship, I think it really charted the course for the dissertation that I wrote, the mindset that I brought to the work that I was doing. I had come doing work with international students and working in exchange in the mobility side of things. And to arrive here and to really have my worldview opened up to the dimensions of international education were really just phenomenal. And so we had just put that project to bed, and Gail called me again and said, well, Joe has another book. And he would really like to have some input, and he would like to have some breakfasts at the Egg and I to begin talking about that project. And so that, of course, given the timing of that quickly moved into going down to the condo in Richfield and spending time with him and with Pat there and talking through that project. And also at that point was involved, and we were looking at, I said, could you look at these pages and what could we do with them? And I think at that point the impetus was just that Joe was pushing so hard to have one last book go to publication. It was clearly something that was a goal for him. And we were a little lost in the process, but how could you not continue to access his thinking and his debate and seeing where the scholarship that he continued to do, the directions that was going. And so when Joe passed, we had these pages. And I think, as my parents said, I don't know how you didn't quit. There were moments where it just felt really difficult. I think we need to acknowledge it felt really difficult to make sure that we were taking a draft and choosing the way to shape that draft and polish that draft in a way that still sounded like Joe. And we would work through whole pages and we would read it and we would say, no, that sounds like us. So we would go back to the original that we had from the manuscript. And so that process did take a very, very long time. But with the support of a lot of people, the project began to take shape. And I think that the passage that I'm going to read is also, why did we keep moving forward? And remember that this was really 2015 to 2021 was the time period that we were doing that. So we called this section in the book, Why Now? International education is never solved because it does not have a beginning and an end. Mestenhauser wrote in 2015 in his last work, which is now part 2 of this volume. It is on a continuing ride across the globe that brings new knowledge all the time. The intervening years have indeed brought an unprecedented volume of new knowledge and information to teachers and learners across the globe. Interconnectivity has rapidly increased communications, partnerships, and mobility, resulting in the creation of new knowledge at a speed that humanity has not experienced before. New knowledge and new circumstances also contribute to stirring of old challenges in a new way, placing unrelenting pressures on fragile systems. All over the world, there has been a rise of nationalism and a shift in leadership to populist, authoritarian regimes, leading to war and dislocation. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken the lives of millions of people, exposing deep flaws in policies and services. Mobility has been dramatically disrupted. Climate change continues to redefine where people are able to live and thrive. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we write this chapter, the murder of George Floyd at the hands of city police in 2020 sparked outrage and demonstrations that reverberated across the United States and other countries in response to the long-standing and systemic racism embedded in so many policies and institutions, including higher education. Long overdue conversations about equality, equity, parity, and inclusion across all types of differences and diversities are taking place, but often clumsily and without a common understanding of the scope of the problems or agreement about the most sustainable actions to take. Without a doubt, this is a critical time for international education. Our work is impacted by history, politics, divisiveness, fear, 24/7 availability of information, and interpersonal connectivity, misunderstandings, ever-changing policies, and encroaching global return to distrust and discomfort with difference. We are challenged to sustain and advance a field despite the rhetoric, confusion, lack of funding, and changing leadership. We need to serve individuals and groups across generations, populations, identities, and worldviews. We are called to balance evidence-based practices with innovation and to strategize about how to do more. Yet in those challenges, there are also meaningful and new opportunities to change, to rethink and re-envision what the field of international education is and can be. Now, perhaps more than ever before, is the time for the systems thinking, for which Mestenhauser advocated so passionately. It is our hope that this volume reinvigorates discussion of Mestenhauser's ideas, many of which were ahead of their time, and most of which remain relevant today. This book is not, and could not be, a comprehensive view of Mestenhauser's impact. Given his sweeping influence and involvement around the world, there are many more books to be written about Joseph Mestenhauser. We're not going to do it. But this volume aims to document key aspects of his intellectual contributions and to inspire the critical and immediate conversations needed to ensure that his most salient ideas about the field of international education can be carried forward, reinvigorating those of us who are familiar with Mestenhauser's work and introducing a new generation of scholars and practitioners to his scholarship.
I moved to Minnesota in 2000 and started at the College of, what was then the College of Continuing Education, and started my master's degree in CIDE, and that's where I met Joe. And then in 2005, I moved to the Carlson School of Management, where I have been ever since, leading global initiatives. And so I would say that at that time, Joe, I feel like he selected me in a way to try to infuse all of these ideas, and by way of helping me get those ideas through to the business school and working closely with Meredith and the GPS Alliance. And I always struggled with this big thinker and how idealistic he was, and then trying to take that and apply it in a business school sense with everything that was going on and everything I was navigating. But I have to say, he always, we talked about this at an event last night, he always was positive and hopeful. And I think that's what always drew me coming back to him. And if he didn't invite me, I would invite myself to meet with him. So he really mentored me through quite a difficult time, and I think today we have a robust office, I would say, and initiatives, thanks in due part to Joe guiding me along the way. I want to really talk a little bit about systems theory and systems thinking, and this is where maybe people start to go to sleep. But it's something that I've been grappling with. We debated a lot. We didn't always agree, but we want to talk about moving forward this concept and other concepts, and so I'm going to read a bit from the book from this. So this volume is inspired by and based on a manuscript that Mestenhauser worked on through his 80s, and tentatively called Framing International Education. Those pages now appear as the sections in part 2 of this volume. In his words, we hear Mestenhauser challenging us to look at the field from a new perspective, to recognize how our own culture, as individuals, as international educators, and as institutional systems can blind us and leave us operating in modes of work that are too limited. He advocates instead for a systems approach as defined by Senge, 1990, quote, a discipline for seeing wholes. It is a framework for seeing interrelationships rather than things, for seeing patterns of change rather than static snapshots, unquote, and to radically examine and alter our practice. Joe envisioned a book to advocate for systems thinking for the field and to explain how frames, Bowman and Deal, could be used to define, analyze, and effectively operate within system complexity. According to a diagram Joe created to outline his thoughts, and I have to say, I think the diagram went on for 3 or 4 pages. It was hilarious. And I think some of you know the diagram I'm talking about. We thought about having it in the book, but
There was a lot of
Information.
cutting and literally not cutting and pasting and tape.
a lot of post-it notes.
With that diagram.
The volume would have included sections on cultural diplomacy, thinking competencies, and much attention to the drivers of international education. His death in March 2015 prevented its completion. But in his final chapters presented here for the first time, those familiar with Joe's work will find his signature commitment to an evolution of thought and will appreciate the attention to familiar themes. These include the power of exposing people to other cultures and differing perspectives, leading them to espouse more ways of seeing and doing. And more than one time, Bob, I have to say, Joe mentioned intentionally bringing you and many leaders from the University of Minnesota on his tours. And he had a lot of outcomes he was working towards for those trips. Culture is core to inquiry and practice, both as a unifier and a limitation on our conceptualization of the world. Our communities, our organizations, our schools and universities, our governance, and the vastness of international education. With his systems thinking lens, Mestenhauser believed and advocated for us to consider both cultural differentiation and integration, finding them equally important and equally misunderstood. Toward that end, Joe envisioned and described international education as a super or supra discipline, one that prods us through differentiation yet binds us together. He believed that through this process and ongoing person-to-person navigation, we could and should facilitate international education and embed a cultural mindset into the fabric of our organizations, our teaching and learning, and our development as world citizens. In his mind, international educators are uniquely positioned to articulate these assets and to take the responsibility of sharing their relevance with leaders around the globe to support and sustain the types of learning required and important for an intrinsically interconnected world. Such a volume would not be possible without Joe's example of perseverance, intellectual curiosity, relentless pursuit of inclusion, unwillingness to settle for mediocrity, and unwavering belief in international educators and their role in the interdiscipline of international education. His guidance that we approach education through the lens of systems thinking has resulted in a diverse array of contributing authors with their unique voices and contexts, and the overarching integrated themes and calls to action. For all of this, we thank Joe for leaving us his legacy and distinct pathways for modeling transformative leadership, acceptance, respect, and a future focus for our field. This volume serves as a reminder of the influence that one person can have in the face of extraordinary challenges. And in discussing this with our contributing authors, we heard time and again about how critical it is to advance Mestenhauser's legacy and ensure that his ideas for shaping international education as a field of knowledge are not lost. In 2000, he wrote, quote, "Above all, the most important aspect of change is that it is produced best in conditions in which ideas and knowledge flow freely, are questioned and debated, and offer possibilities for experimentation," unquote. In bringing forth Mestenhauser's last manuscript, we aim to fulfill that charge and spark debate about the ways in which international educators can address today's pressing challenges. I had the privilege and honor to present with him in 2010 at the GPS Alliance's first conference here at the University of Minnesota, sponsored by the Curriculum and Campus Internationalization Group. And what's amazing about this conference every few years is it brings together the entire system, and we learn from each other all that's going on in international education on this campus. And I have to say, I have no idea how I made it to Minnesota. I don't know how I made it to University of Minnesota. It was a newspaper ad, and I have to admit. But I just feel so lucky, and we thought it would be really important to hear Joe's voice.
The title of our presentation is in fact in form of a question: theory or practice or theory. The differences between the inductive and deductive thinking, basically. And we ran into this question when we started thinking about how to organize it. Who was going to start? Should we start with the specific programs, the inductive fashion, like we in fact did? Or should we go with the theory, which is more common, the deductive approach, let's say, in Europe? But I just wanted to point out to you is that we don't want to create the impression that there is a theory on the one hand and the practice on the other hand, because they are very much intertwined, and of course one depends on the other one. But then of course if you go to countries like China or Japan or Korea, Asian country, or Indonesia, you have still a different way of doing it. The reason we formulated this question out here is because we did want to stress the idea is that one of the goals of global education is in fact to enable people to think in different ways of thinking, in particularly non-Western as well. So that is, to some extent, a beginning of that too. The problem is that when we evaluate courses, for example, we pay a lot of attention to the way that students are accustomed to. And most Americans, of course, are accustomed to the inductive way of thinking, to learning by doing and so on. So how do you then, in fact, change the whole system of evaluation of the faculty when, in fact, in order to produce a different way of thinking about a subject, you need to also do things that are uncomfortable for the students to learn.
Lead for the future, not just the present. Shift away from dualistic thinking and explore myriad mindsets. Intentionally include a greater diversity of people and ideas. And always start with theory. So I want you to think for a minute. It sounds like you've had some robust conversations. In true Joe fashion, when you leave today, if there's one thing that maybe you can take back to your work or community, what would that one thing be? I can't think of a better call to action than introducing my friend and colleague, Eva Janabova from the Czech Republic, who has established an institute for excellence in internationalization, and not only working across the Czech Republic and with the Czech ministry, but she's working all across Europe. She's connecting back with us here at the University of Minnesota. I can't help but feel, even in this past week, with a number of meetings that we've had, that Joe is really still alive and well in you, and you have that same determination and perseverance and curiosity. And I just would like to invite you to come and tell us a little bit about your institute and how we might be able to support you in this.
Actually, thank you so much. I think we are all sort of ready to go and put the book on the shelf, but we won't because as you have the bookmark from Trisha and Anne and Brian, the hard work is to come. And so I really like the diversity in this room, and so I would like to steer up what Joe would steer up, which would be no complacency. From now on, we work even harder. So I'm not sure if that's it for you guys. Maybe not. And I'm thankful to you all, and it seems like Minnesota can't get rid of me. And I wouldn't be here because of you, and of course Joe, and especially because of the anniversary that Kayla mentioned yesterday, which is of the Velvet Revolution, and I think it's so important to remind us of what it is about. The anniversary, and it's about celebration of democracy, and I think that's so relevant, not only to us after the 33 years, but I think it's very relevant to you guys here. It's very relevant in Europe, with my friend looking at me, and who else should take up the hard work? The international educators. And I think that really going back to the mutual understanding that we talked at our table, that Joe was pushing, and the rationales in international education that are so connected with the values of democracy, international understanding, is just not about the high rankings. It's not about just sending people around the world. There is much more to it, and I think that's something that actually I'm really trying to do with our work in the Czech Republic, and I'm really thankful that the Mestenhauser family has been always supportive of that, and consulted, and I could have consulted everything with them, and so it happened that after the many years, and I was just describing that when I was here and Joe became my supervisor in 2004, and I got the dissertation in, and so on and so forth, there was no actually momentum in the Czech Republic because there was not yet the cognitive shift. It all sort of happened slowly with the European Union pushing, and sort of we are getting there, but still not there yet. And so it took me many years. Joe said it would take me 15 years, and it already actually was 16 years when I managed to establish an institute, something that is at a university. It might take many more years to make it into a department with a graduate degree, though we are negotiating with the University of Minnesota, and Fred is nodding, and that center a joint degree, so many things might be happening. But I'm really actually thankful for all the support that has gone into it, into believing in what I was doing as a very odd person, coming back here and sort of getting energized and then going back home to fight alone, because this is really something that sometimes we take for granted things, democracy is something we take for granted, but we also take for granted community, being in a community and having people around us when we can rely on and just go to and debate and convene, and so one of my ideas is actually to take maybe the debating and convening and with the EU being a little bit isolated, maybe because of COVID and the United States being a little bit isolated in international education. Not just only because of COVID, but also for other political reasons in the last years. I would love to actually bring people together and for example, we have we're piloting international professional learning communities between our university, Palacky, and the University of Minnesota with the instructors who are working together on improving their teaching. And I would love to actually bring some of these ideas also into the international education and maybe start with Mestenhauser circles of diverse people, like the diversity in this room where there is a lot of diversity in experience, maybe in power, maybe in different ideas and regions and perspectives, how we look at things, and I think that's really important for international education to stay in this diverse, not the US way of international education, not the European way of international education, but in order to be innovative and novel, I think the diverse convening is what we can, how we can do it, how we can actually find new ways that are post-COVID challenges in international education, and so yeah, so this is what, and I'm really lucky that I'm supported by a university. We were here actually a year ago with my boss, with the vice president of Palacky University, who's a former Fulbrighter at medical school, and so he's very supportive of it, and so the institute found a supportive home in the Czech Republic, and I would love to actually continue the collaboration with the University of Minnesota, but also of course with other universities around the world. And I think we have so much to do in front of us, and if we support each other, we can do a lot. But if we isolate ourselves and stay in our bubbles, then that's really hard.
I just want to add one thing, because I think Eva is very humble. I learned a lot this week, and I would strongly encourage you to read her chapter, that even today, being in the Czech Republic, not having the language or the words for internationalization or international education consistently, that is something that is hard for us to fathom. She also is the only PhD in international education in the Czech Republic. And so she is the pioneer in her country and connected to us, and I think it behooves us to really move that forward and bring that back and connect the legacy, the Mestenhauser Legacy Initiative with Eva and what it is that she's doing. And so we know that as friends of Joe and all of the action that you're already doing, we'll give you updates about the Institute, but she is convening faculty from CEHT, from nursing, from all over the University of Minnesota and these professional learning communities. I learned that the EU, she's getting a lot of funding from the EU, and the EU also has been supportive of non-EU participation. And she's one of the only grantees that has included a non-EU partner, us at the University of Minnesota, in these grant funds. And so her ideas of having a tripartite relationship and bringing all of us together is quite unique. And when she says she's somewhat isolated and going back and doing this on her own, that's true. With the help of her rector and vice rector, I think her new university where she is has been supportive. And I just extend the support to you and ask you to also reach out to her, and we'll stay connected and we'll move these things forward.